What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? Today we're going to be looking over a video that is apparently not Pascal's wager, but is trying to put forth the idea that atheism is all risk and no reward, as opposed to Christianity, which is apparently just full of rewards. Let's see what he's got.
Let's say April was correct and April and May died. Well, April, who believed that God existed and believed that the only way to go to heaven was to put faith in what Jesus did on the cross. So April, if she's right, then she's going to heaven because she put faith in Jesus. So she's gained everything, right? If she's wrong, she's gained nothing, she's lost nothing. But if she's right, she's gained everything. She's gained an eternity in heaven. So now let's look at May. So May in this situation would have been wrong because April was right. What has she lost, right? She hasn't gained anything. What has she lost? She's lost the opportunity to go to heaven, and unfortunately, because of that, she's going to hell, the only alternative to heaven in the afterlife.
Well, yeah, if Christianity is correct in its definition of what happens in the afterlife. But also, if Christianity is wrong, it's not necessarily nothing that happens. I mean, what if one of the other religions is correct? Then if April is wrong in her belief in Christianity, then she would still be going to hell and burning there because she followed Christianity. So it kind of seems like you're misleading us into thinking that if Christianity's wrong, then just simply nothing happens after we die, which is one possible answer, but there are other possible answers out there. I mean, this is really seeming like a Pascal's wager kind of argument, but apparently, according to the video here, it's not. So let's see what this guy's talking about. Alright, heathens, well, I wanted to start off today's video by telling you that I know that I've covered Pascal's wager extensively before, and just to kind of give you a brief synopsis of the arguments for and against Pascal's wager, it basically boils down to what happens after we die. On Christianity, we go to heaven as long as we believe in the faith. But on atheism, nothing happens. So it kind of seems like you have all of the rewards if you believe in Christianity. But this commits a very basic fallacy, and that's a false dichotomy. Because it's not just the choice between Christianity and atheism, it's atheism versus theism on the whole, which is then subdivided into multiple different ideas about God and the afterlife. So you're not really just judging Christianity against atheism. You would be judging atheism against all the other definitions of God and the afterlife. By boiling it down to just two particular possibilities, being Christianity and atheism, you are misleading your viewers into thinking that Christianity provides this hopeful outcome if it is true, and if it's not true, you just lose nothing. That's not actually the case, and we are going to find that out today.
Have you ever heard this idea that Christianity is a faith-based concept? Well, of course that's true because we're putting faith in things that we cannot 100% prove. But the truth is, everyone has faith, not just Christians, even atheists, because an atheist cannot prove definitively that God doesn't exist, but yet they put faith in this idea that they can't, and something that they can't prove. So even atheism is a faith-based belief because they believe that God does not exist, even though they can't prove it. So everything basically has faith.
Well, this all comes down to how you define faith. If you take faith by its very general definition of just having confidence or trust in someone or something, regardless of how you support that trust, then yeah, I would agree. Everybody can have faith in something because everybody can have this confidence or trust in someone else. Now, whether or not that's backed by evidence to justify having that confidence and trust is another issue entirely, and that's where he's kind of convoluting the conversation here, because religious faith oftentimes is not supported by evidence, and at some point in rationalizing the religion, what you end up doing is just having to admit that there's no evidence for it, but even though there's no evidence, you believe it anyways, which is what many people would call blind faith. He's making the argument that atheism is the position that God does not exist, which could be a possible definition for atheism, but that is not how all atheists use that label. there are some atheists out there that claim to definitely know that God does not exist and make that positive assertion. I'm not one of those. I'm an agnostic atheist, so that means that I don't know whether or not a God exists, but I also do not believe one to exist. And that's merely speaking to what I believe. And it doesn't take any faith for me not to believe in something that doesn't have enough evidence to support its existence. That particular position will always be devoid of faith, while the religious position, at least in this context, will always be primarily reliant on this blind faith. So no, I wouldn't agree on your particular context of faith that atheists also have faith.
There's very few things in this world that we can actually prove 100% to be true. But who has more faith, an atheist or a Christian?
Obviously, Christians have more faith than atheists, at least in this particular context, because again, atheism does not require faith. It's just being unconvinced of the evidence. That doesn't require faith at all.
Well, to kind of go through this, we're going to go through an example of two people. Let's imagine two women, April and May. April hears the gospel for the first time, and the Holy Spirit's convicting her. She hears about this Savior who loved her enough, this God who loved her enough to die on the cross for her sins so that she could have eternal life in heaven. So she's excited about this. She accepted salvation, and she goes to her friend May and says, "Hey, listen, I was just told about this being, this God who loved me enough to die on the cross, and there's an afterlife, and if you believe in him, if you believe in Jesus, then you can go to this afterlife in heaven. But if you don't, you'll go to hell." And May looks at what April is saying and says, "How ridiculous you are to believe such a thing that you can't even prove. You can't prove something, so you keep your faith, I'll keep my facts, and we'll see which of us is right when we die."
I really don't think that this is a conversation that any atheist would have. But just for the sake of argument, let's say this conversation actually did exist. I don't understand why you would expect anybody to be convinced by an anecdotal argument that somebody heard that somebody else died for all of our sins. I don't understand why that should be convincing to anybody upon first hearing it. I sincerely doubt April hearing that particular message for the first time and being immediately convinced. But regardless of that point, it's not May's fault that she is unconvinced by the argument that April has presented. I mean, April didn't present a case for what she's saying to be true or anything like that. I would also like to turn this particular thing around on you. And what if, let's say, a Mormon came to you and proclaimed their particular faith, and then you rejected it in the same way that May did? Would you then still hold to the same position that you are now? Or would you be more like May, rejecting their particular message because they just came to you with some kind of anecdotal evidence that Joseph Smith was visited by an angel and he's a new prophet? Or would you expect yourself, upon hearing this message, to immediately turn on your faith, Christianity, to take up Mormonism, which is a type of Christianity? You're still believing in Jesus. It's just a little different in that it's newer and just a tad bit crazier. But you have to understand, this ultimately stems from the problem of taking atheism and Christianity in isolation when you're presenting your argument. You're not presenting it as if it's atheism versus all of these other religions out there that's all claiming this anecdotal evidence, and none of them have evidence to support their claims. You're not presenting it that way. You're just saying, oh, here's the one religion, and it's just this one religion versus atheism. And I feel like that is a gross misrepresentation of this particular discussion.
Now, unfortunately, that's a terrible idea, because if you're wrong, it's too late. So let's imagine both of them die. And let's imagine in this particular part of the story that May was correct. May was the one who was an atheist, didn't believe in God, because she said it's fictional or something like that, because you can't prove it. Which, of course, she couldn't prove that God doesn't exist. But anyways, so let's say May was correct, that there is no afterlife. Both April and May, of course, die. Nothing happens to them. So we would ask the question, what did April lose from believing in God if both of them were going to die anyways and nothing was going to happen? Well, we would say she lost nothing. If she was wrong, oh well. she's lost nothing.
I don't exactly think that April has lost nothing. I mean, if she has spent her entire life dedicated to spreading the message of Jesus Christ, and it's not actually a real thing, and she has, like, driven away some people, or she has condemned some people, or she has, pushed people out of her life that she normally wouldn't have pushed people out of her life, then I would definitely say that she has lost a substantial amount when she dies. Instead of living for herself, instead of doing things that she wanted to do, she was doing things that she thought that this God wanted to do, which was really things that other people wanted her to do. See, this is why for me, becoming an atheist actually gave more meaning to my life. I'm not saying that's the case for every single person out there, or that every single Christian is living a meaningless life or anything like that. I'm just saying my own personal experiences is that I found much more meaning to my life once I was not living it for a God that I just simply didn't know whether or not he existed. Once I started doing things for myself, I thoroughly enjoyed life, because this is the only life that I have. So it inherently cannot be meaningless if it's the only life that I have.
So then what about April? Or May, not April. So let's say May, who was the atheist, she was right. What has she gained? Nothing. She still just died. Nothing happens to her after death, according to what May believes.
I think you characterizing May as not gaining anything is kind of a misrepresentation. I mean, if you pitted the two against each other, with April living a life for Christ, spreading the message, doing things specifically because she thought God wanted them to be done, or God wanted her to do those things, then she's not really living her life for herself. While on the other hand, May over there was busy living her own life for her own reasons. She got the most out of life. She was able to fully enjoy life, in my opinion. It's true that Christians could fully enjoy their life serving their Lord and everything like that, but you always have to wonder, what would you do differently if you weren't out serving God? Like, would you be doing something else with your life? Would you be an electrical engineer? Would you be an astronaut? Would you be a physicist? Would you be a sports star or something like that? Like, if you weren't serving God, what else would you be doing with your life? And I would say that that is the thing that you're missing out on. And inherently, May would not be missing out on that because she would not be serving God.
To what May believes. So if April was wrong, she's lost nothing. If May was correct, she's gained nothing. She's lost nothing, she's gained nothing. Both of them are neutral. Nothing's happened to them. So now let's see if April was correct. Let's look at it from the flip side of the coin. Let's say April was correct and April and May died. Well, April, who believed that God existed and believed that the only way to go to heaven was to put faith in what Jesus did on the cross. So April, if she's right, then she's going to heaven because she put faith in Jesus. So she's gained everything, right? If she's wrong, she's gained nothing, she's lost nothing. But if she's right, she's gained everything. She's gained an eternity in heaven. So now let's look at May. So May in this situation would have been wrong because April was right. What has she lost, right? She hasn't gained anything. What has she lost? She's lost the opportunity to go to heaven. And unfortunately, because of that, she's going to hell, the only alternative to heaven in the afterlife.
This particular point in the video suffers from the exact same point that I've mentioned before. You're taking both of these positions in isolation, regardless of what other answers could possibly be out there. Also, how sure are you that you have the correct version of heaven, or that you know how to get into heaven? I mean, if it's simply believing in Jesus, then I guess it's easy to get in heaven as long as you're Christian. But what if you have a more complicated theology and think that you have to be a Christian, you also have to be baptized in the correct way, and then you've actually got to do like the correct things in your life, the correct works, in order to get into heaven. So you have to have the ultra-specific definition of the theology in order to meet the requirements to get into heaven. You're talking about Christianity as if it's just this one singular idea, when in fact Christianity has a lot of different ideas about how to get to heaven. Now, it's true that if Christianity is correct, then May, the atheist, me, would be going to hell. But how do you know that we would rather be in heaven than in hell? I know me personally, I don't mean to speak for every atheist out there, but I know me personally, I would rather be in hell than serve this God for eternity if Christianity is correct. He's a horrible figure in the Bible. He makes no sense whatsoever. And honestly, I just don't want to praise and worship this sadistic God for all of eternity. So, I mean, I haven't lost anything at that point. I guess I would have gotten what I exactly wanted, and that's to be as far away from that God as possible. But like I said before, you're also not representing the other religions like Mormonism, Scientology, or Islam. If any of those are correct, then both the atheist and the Christian are damned to hell at this point. I know that you would most likely come back with, well, I believe that Jesus Christ is the only way to get into heaven. But you also have to understand that your ad hoc assertion that Jesus Christ is the only way to get into heaven sounds just as reasonable as the claim of Islam or the claim of Mormonism or any of the other religions out there. They have just as much evidence for them, meaning that they have none. So it is really important in this particular argument for you to distinguish why your religion is special among all the other religions that also have no evidence to support it.
So if April, which was the Christian, is wrong, she's gained nothing, she's lost nothing. If she's right, she gains everything. She gains an eternity in heaven. But if May, again, if May is correct, she's gained nothing. If she's wrong, she's lost everything. She's lost opportunity to go to heaven, and she's bound to go to hell because that is the only alternative if April is correct.
Okay, so I disagree with a lot of things here, and I feel like I should put up a corrected version of your image, because obviously if atheism is correct and there's nothing after this life, which I think is the most likely situation, then obviously May has gained something, being a life fully lived. If April is wrong, she could potentially have lived a life for something that was fruitless and therefore dedicated her precious time here on this earth to things that she necessarily wouldn't have done if she had not believed in God. And if April is wrong, then she has potentially wasted part of her life living for this God, not doing things that she would have done if she had not believed in God. So it doesn't seem like she's lost nothing. Potentially, she has lost a good portion of her life. Now, if Christianity is correct, she hasn't necessarily gained everything in heaven. First, you have to distinguish which denomination of Christianity is the correct one in order to get into heaven, because otherwise,
April's still burning in hell.
But I see one thing here that you haven't covered, and that's if both of us are wrong and some other religion is correct, which I think you're kind of about to mention, hopefully. But it's very important in this particular context, in this particular question, being Pascal's wager, it's very important for you to cover these other religions, because otherwise you're presenting a false dichotomy here between these two individuals, because it's not inherently better to believe in Christianity. That is the position I feel like you're arguing for, because compared to atheism, you're trying to convince us that Christianity is the better choice, when in actuality, Christianity has no better of a chance of being correct as the other religions out there. Now, as far as statistical probabilities go, Christianity has a very low probability of being correct, while atheism has a 50% chance of being correct, because a correct comparison would be atheism versus theism. Neither of those things really state that anything happens after this life, just whether or not a God exists. So it's a 50-50 shot statistically on whether or not atheism's correct. But if we were to represent the number of religions with a variable like n, then Christianity would have a 1 divided by n% chance of being correct. And that n would represent the infinite number of religions that it currently exists and that will exist. Not to mention the number of denominations within Christianity and within each of those respective religions.
So you see the different risk here. One, the Christian, either they lose nothing or they gain heaven, and the atheist, either they gain nothing or they go to hell, right? So oftentimes you'll hear me say, if I'm wrong, oh well, but if you're wrong, oh hell.
I have to say that I love your wordplay on this. If I'm wrong, oh well. If you're wrong, oh hell. I can't. I mean, I do have to chuckle at that. That's pretty good. I appreciate a good wordplay on those kind of things. But I still think that you're misrepresenting the actual situation, and you're presenting it in a way that makes Christianity look like the better option. But in reality, it's not that simple.
Right? Because, again, if I'm wrong, I've lost nothing. But if you're wrong, if an atheist is wrong, they've lost everything. So now let's imagine it as like a business. So kind of compare this to a businesses. Let's say two businesses are trying to want you to invest in their business. So you, of course, want to know what's the risk in investing in these businesses and what is the reward. So you ask them, what is the risk and what is the reward? If it doesn't go as planned, what do I lose? And if it does go as planned, what do I gain? Well, one business says, well, if it doesn't go as planned, then you lose nothing. All right, so zero risk. You've lost nothing. But if it does go as planned, then you gain billions of dollars. Well, that seems like a pretty good investment. I think any investor out there would want to invest in that company.
But I also don't think that any investor would really believe you if you said, well, if you invest with us, you're not going to lose anything if we fail. How does that make sense? Also, I would say that this is sort of misleading the investors, and I feel like that's illegal. Because what you're trying to tell them is like, hey, give us your money, and if the business fails, then you're still going to get your money back, which could rightfully be true. You could refund them their money. But I don't think that that's reality. Plus, you're not exactly communicating with the investor how likely it is that your business is going to succeed. And that's a key component to understanding the problem with Pascal's wager, or the argument that you're making, is that you have a very slim chance of this actually panning out. So it would seem like you're misleading investors to invest their, money in your example, but your time in your life in reality into this thing called Christianity Inc. If it doesn't pay out for you, then you have definitely lost something.
So then let's go to the other side, the other business. This business says, well, if it goes as planned, you don't gain anything. What? And if it doesn't go as planned, then you'll lose everything. Who would invest in a business like that? But yet that's what atheism does when they take on this idea that God does not exist, something that they can't prove, so they're taking it by faith that God does not exist. And if they're wrong, then they lose everything. If they're right, then they gain nothing. Whereas a Christian, if they're right, they gain everything. If they're wrong, they lose nothing.
Well, but see, you're still misrepresenting it here, because the atheist business, Atheism Inc., if you will, if you invest in that, then you do potentially gain something during this life. You gain life experiences that you wouldn't have had otherwise. You gain a fully lived life. You have the potential to make friends that you wouldn't have necessarily made friends with. So, I mean, if atheism does pan out, then I definitely do gain something. But if atheism is wrong, then we still don't know what happens after that point. We don't know whether or not we've lost anything, because we don't know that Christianity is correct. We don't have the evidence that it is, and there are multiple other religions that could have won out, essentially. And so atheists could be favored upon in the afterlife. I mean, you have no inclination as to what happens after this life, other than what's been told in your Christianity Inc. handbook. But other people have handbooks, and other people have ideas about what happens after this life. So I would say that it's pretty fallacious to say that atheists have lost everything if there is a God, because we don't know if we've lost anything.
There's no risk when it comes to Christianity. Now, you can talk about other religions. Maybe other religions are correct and Christianity is wrong. Obviously, I believe that Christianity is right. But you could argue that. But just comparing it to atheism, saying if one is right and one is wrong, Christianity loses nothing, atheism loses everything.
But why would you only compare those two things? I mean, for one thing, you're making it way too simplistic. You have to actually consider the ramifications of how many denominations there are in Christianity. What are all the rules that it takes to get into heaven? It's not as simple as you're making it out to be. But taking these two positions in isolation does a great disservice to the conversation being had, because you're not analyzing the actual dilemma of what happens after we die. You're basically wrapping up this argument in a pretty package that makes Christianity look like the better choice. And that's just not an honest way to have this particular conversation.
So anyways, that's why it's more, you have to have more faith to be an atheist than you do to be a Christian, because of course, when you look at the risk, Christians are really taking no risk, whereas atheists are taking the biggest risk. So anyways, that's the idea behind faith when it comes to atheism.
See, I don't see it that way. I don't see it as atheists taking the bigger risk, because if I'm wrong in the end and God does exist and he's the Christian version of God and it's any one particular denomination that has the correct definition of God, but it's still the Yahweh God, then I definitely want to be as far away from him as possible. And I'm definitely not going to want to worship him for the rest of eternity. Honestly, I wouldn't want to live for the rest of eternity. But I mean, you also don't know whether or not you're correct in your particular version of Christianity. That's one hurdle you got to get. The other hurdle that you got to get through is the other religions that exist out there that could also be correct. You kind of blew through that particular point in the actual video rather quickly and just sort of dismissed, other religions. And I'm guessing that's because you believe in your particular religion wholeheartedly, which I'm perfectly fine with. But at the same time, you have to understand that your religion has as much, if not less, evidence for it than some of these other religions out there. All in all, I found this video very unconvincing. This guy, Daniel, he goes through some objections to this, and I kind of want to cover them right now. He posted a sort of 4-point rebuttal to some of the common arguments that he's gotten, which I'm sure are representative of what I brought up here. So let's see what Daniel has to say further. He says, first, many have compared this video to the Pascal wager and have used the same arguments against this video as they do against the Pascal's wager. Examples, false dichotomy, what about other religions or possibilities? However, those who argued this likely did not finish the video and just assumed that they could use the same arguments against this video. Had they finished the video, they would have heard me explain there were other possibilities, such as other religions, but for the sake of time, I was only going to discuss the two possibilities. So never did I imply there were only two choices. I even made it clear that there were many possibilities, meaning that false dichotomy does not apply. But I would disagree here, because it obviously does still apply, because you're representing it just atheism versus Christianity when the actual dilemma is between atheism and theism on the whole, which would include all of the other religions. So you still have not addressed this particular response to your video here, because it's still a false dichotomy. I'm wondering, how do you rationalize the other religions are false while yours is true, other than just saying, well, I sincerely believe my faith to be true, or I have a Bible, or something of that nature, because those are not convincing arguments whatsoever. Almost every religion out there has a book, so I don't know why your book is even more true than all these other books. Second, shifting the burden of proof. I understand why so many people felt that I expected atheists to prove that God does not exist. I did not actually say that, nor was that my intention, but I do understand why so many inferred it that way. I claim that atheists could not disprove the existence of God, not that they needed to disprove. No one could disprove the possibility of a God existing, and that was my only point that I was trying to make. That the existence of God is proven to be a possibility that no one could ever disprove is a possibility. I mean, I would kind of agree with this, with the exception that you're trying to label all atheists as Gnostic atheists, meaning that we know that God doesn't exist, or that we say that God definitely doesn't exist. When in actuality, the majority of atheists out there are agnostic atheists. Or maybe I shouldn't be so generalizing about it, but I would say that a good portion of the atheists that I've met personally and that I know are agnostic atheists. I agree that nobody could disprove the possibility of God, at least not sufficient. I think that the only problem with this particular section is that you kind of asserted that atheists have the positive belief that God does not exist, when in actuality that's a subset of the atheist community. Third, that atheism is a faith-based concept. I actually did not know that there would be so much kickback on this aspect of the video. Really? If ever there is more than one possibility, such as does a God exist or does a God not exist, then no matter which possibility a person chooses, they must choose by faith simply because there is another possibility. I don't exactly think so, because you can be unconvinced by a particular position and believe it not to be true, regardless of whether or not you've definitely proven it not to be true. See, this is still the whole idea that atheists assert a positive belief that God does not exist, but you're not taking into account the softer position of not knowing whether or not a God exists, but not believing in a God. Those are two very different positions. He goes on to say, even those who change the statement from atheists believe that God does not exist to atheists don't believe that God exists would still fall under the category of choosing the possibility that there is no God. Therefore, because there is another possibility, such as that there is a God, therefore, an atheist follows the possibility that there is no God by faith simply because there is another possibility. I disagree with this. I'm not even sure if I really understood what you were trying to say in this particular section, but it still requires no faith to remain unconvinced by a particular position. And that's really what most atheists, I would say, fall under, is being unconvinced about the proposition that God does exist. That doesn't take any faith or anything like that in order to remain unconvinced. And then finally, Christians risk nothing. I believe the reason there was so much kickback to this was because of a misunderstanding. I was viewing the situation from the perspective of what happens after death. Others seem to view it from the perspective of what happens during life. When looking at it from that perspective, then yes, potentially a theist might have more invested than an atheist would. However, again, I was referring to the rewards or losses at death, not life. From that perspective, if May was correct, that would be the atheist, then she would lose/gain nothing at death. So that particular disagreement was a matter of misunderstanding. Well, I don't believe so, because I feel like I tackled this in my response to your video, because obviously May, the atheist, would gain something at death. She would have gained a fully lived life at that point. She would have done things that if she had believed in God, she wouldn't have necessarily done. She fully enjoyed her life, which isn't to say that Christians don't enjoy their lives, but she would have had the opportunity to fully enjoy her life the way that she wanted to enjoy her life, not the way that somebody else has told her that she should live her life. So anyways, that was the video for today. I really appreciate Cheney Baptist, Daniel, who's the youth pastor there, for putting out this video. Let me know down below if this video convinced you that God does exist or that Christianity is a better option compared to atheism. I'd really love to hear what you guys think. While you're down there, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe if you like videos like this. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens!